Before I start, I'd like to commend the makeup artist of Comrade Amna for her nicely done rouge. Mr. Speaker, there are some adjectives which we can use to describe Budget 2019, and possibly even a number of phrases. But when I looked at the body language of the Honorable Minister of Finance as he was presenting his 4.5 hours marathon, I noticed in the body language of the Honorable Minister that this government is in a state of nervousness and fear. And I think that the battering that the government took at the November 12th local government elections, where it could only muster just over 34% of the electorate, and the imminent no-confidence vote tabled against it, jolted a knee-jerk budget presentation. But the poor performance of the economy, or may I say the super underperformance of the economy, through ill-advised policies and propaganda-driven interventions of the government, did not create space beyond what was presented in Budget 2019. And as a result, Mr. Speaker, Budget 2019 is indicative of a government that is borrowing more, taxing more, and spending more, but a government that has no plans for how, or as a country, we can do more. This could very well be the last budget of this government, and its contents are a culmination of 4 years of failures. It has now become obvious that the good life promises that have been pontificated so liberally by the regime were constructed on sand and a porous foundation. So rather than being built upon a rock, they built it upon sand. And those of you who know the Bible very well, we know that a wise man built his house upon a rock. So I would suspect, Mr. Speaker, that there are not very many wise people on the opposite side of the House. Which allows me to posit, Mr. Speaker, that this budget is based heavily on inequality and ideological morass, where the poor are most affected. And my honorable colleague Irfan Ali espoused the statistics earlier. Mr. Speaker, this government's lack an ideological base, which is built on working class enhancement. And that is why this budget doesn't speak very clearly and definitively to job creation and addressing the 32,000+ jobs and primary livelihoods that have been lost over the last 3.5 years. The taxation fetish, which has become synonymous with this government, is ever present in Budget 2019. The continued deleterious and damaging effects on the poor and the vulnerable are still on the fast track. We now live, Mr. Speaker, in a country where poor people, working people, business people, breadwinners, mothers, and most importantly, young people have become disillusioned, demotivated, and unenthusiastic with the direction of this government. Whilst the record of the People's Progressive Party Civic is one of proven success during its reign of government and is well documented over the 23 years of our government, this current coalition government operates without a clear economic plan to ensure healthy economic growth, a stable currency, lowering the public debt, an expanded GDP, cutting-edge investments, and job creation possibilities for tens of thousands of especially young people. The long and short of Budget 2019, Mr. Speaker, I would classify as being cruel and callous, because it gives a pittance, 3.5 billion approximately in the tax measures, but it takes a vault in excess of 31 billion in tax collection in 2019. And as we speak of tax measures, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to share that Budget 2019 is unrealistic and unsustainable in the medium to long term. And why do I say so? VAT collection, or the reduction in VAT that this government campaigned upon from 16% to 14%, they claimed that prices were going to be reduced and cost of living was also going to be lowered. But what do we now have? In 2017, VAT collection was 42.5 billion Guyana dollars. In 2019, at 14%, VAT collection is expected to increase to 54.464 billion Guyana dollars. And we are all paying for this. VAT collection, Mr. Speaker, VAT exemption versus the zero-rated VAT. We know that the government said practically everything that were zero-rated previously, including baby milk, as we had done, and Pampers and so forth. They are now VAT exempted. But the fundamental difference between VAT exemption and zero-rated VAT is that input VAT cannot be reclaimed. And that is why we find that final prices or consumer prices are still so exorbitant, and the cost of living is going out of the window. And what about corporation tax that private businesses pay? Corporation tax in 2017 was 30.13 billion Guyana dollars. It is expected to rise to 36.355 billion in 2019. This again, who is going to be paying for all of this? So, in effect, the final consumer is the one who is going to be bearing the cost of all of these. So, Mr. Speaker, and let us look further at revenues. Bank of Guyana profits have deteriorated. In 2017, Bank of Guyana profits were $3.75 billion. In 2019, it is expected to deteriorate by 44% to $2.1 billion. And let us look now at the natural resources sector, Mr. Speaker. Rents and royalties, a primary source of income of the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. It has reduced by 36% from 9.42 billion in 2017 to 5.95 billion expected in 2019. And one must ask the question, and I hope the government has the answers for it, why are rents and royalties reducing? And then we will also look at incomes. For the incomes, the Guyana Gold Board, a reduction of 55% in revenues, 73.92 billion in 2017. The Gold Board is expected to earn just 33.42 billion in 2019. And these are instructive numbers for all of our country to understand, and especially those who represent the government, because their fanfare and the regaling of the House on an early budget and a 300 billion budget, when we think of these figures, we realize that the output of the government on the expenditure of the budget does not match what is expected by the people of this country. The natural resources sector is now in a stalemate or in a state of permanent decline. Everywhere we go, Mr. Speaker, every single miner, every single forester that you come into contact with is worried and in despair that their loans cannot be repaid, their bills cannot be paid, their equipment cannot be repaired, and their machinery cannot be maintained. The oil sector, Mr. Speaker, which has its genesis in the People's Progressive Party Civic, is now before us. We are 12 months before our first drop of oil is produced. Exxon only today announced that its 10th well that it drilled, we now have about 5 billion barrels of oil. And 12 months away, Mr. Speaker, our country is worse off. Our country is worse off because of bad, and I dare say corrupt negotiations of the coalition government regarding the oil contract. To date, Mr. Speaker, Guyana does not have a local content policy. So how will our country benefit? To date, there is no sustainability plan of how oil revenues will be used to develop our country. To date, we are unprepared as a country to even audit the oil contracts between government and the oil companies. So there's a good possibility that we'll be paying cost oil in perpetuity. The decimation of the main sectors of the economy. I'm coming to you just now. The decimation of the main sectors of the economy, which are the main source of employment, community development, and food security, is without doubt the most visionless and vindictive pursuit in the modern era. 7,000 sugar workers, and I repeat, Comrade Valda Lawrence, 7,000 sugar workers have lost their jobs because of the vindictiveness of your government. On the Essequibo Coast, Mr. Speaker, farmers are paid $300 now as I stand before you for a bag of paddy, when in fact this government claimed that they were going to pay farmers up to $9,000 per bag. And the reason I raise this is because on the Essequibo Coast at local government elections, there were 60 constituencies. The PPP 146, APNU could have only mustered 14. The AFC could not even find a candidate to contest local government elections in Region 2, just for your information. So the budget measures delineated in 11 pages of the speech are counterproductive to stimulating the economy. It gives one the impression that the government is driving in darkness without any headlights on. And I would like to ask the Honorable Minister, where are the pro-poor measures? Where are the incentives to generate productivity in the agricultural and manufacturing sectors? Where are the policies to engender local content participation in the oil sector? Where are the reforms that will ensure our Constitution is compliant with the dreams and aspirations of our people? One expects that a budget is an imperative tool to building a strong political process. The enhancement of good governance, the curbing and curtailing of corruption, which seems to be one of the things that has overtaken this government, the building of trust amongst the political players, the fostering of goodwill between government and the people. Budget 2019 is none of this. It is 4.5 hours of verbiage that takes us blindly careening into the path of disaster. Budget 2019 is, Honorable Minister Jordan, is a grand show of incomparable incompetence and ineptitude. And speaking of constitutional reform, Mr. Speaker, may I remind that this has been a colossal failure over the last 3.5 years, to the extent that poor leadership and shameful levels of governance have overtaken this country at all levels. And I wonder who heads the constitutional reform process in this government. And let us hope not that constitutional reform is not just a rubber stamp. The unbridling of bad governance, lack of accountability and transparency, and malfeasance through procurement fraud and executive interference have become the norm these days. It is now obvious that good governance is a cliche rather than based on principles that are logical, fair, and instructive to nation building and national prosperity. On this issue of good or bad governance, public servants and contractors in this country are besieged with fear and fear of victimization. Only recently, Mr. Speaker, the chairperson of the PNC, who is also the Minister of Public Health, is quoted in the Stabroek News edition of November 30th, 2018, on a front page headline. I quote, "The only friends I got is PNC. So the only people I could give work to is PNC." And I end quote. And the Honorable Minister is heckling, saying, so what is wrong with that? Mr. Speaker, it is fundamentally wrong. This country cannot move forward when the chairman of the PNC and the de facto leader of the PNC is only focused on providing opportunities for card-bearing members of the PNC. This uncontrollable crudity and quite unintelligent defense of it by the AFC chair, Raphael Trotman, who, by the way, has been absent for quite a number of months and totally missing, speaks volumes of how unhinged and unfair and possibly despotic this regime is. Rather than being qualified,
you have 5 minutes remaining.
Rather than being qualified and employed through merit and fairness, the PNC chair and AFC leader are promulgating employment through a PNC membership card. But, Mr. Speaker, despite all the verbosity in the budget, it is without a single major initiative to create industries that will generate enormous jobs with comparable incomes. And I wish to posit that not a single new enterprise or job will be created through this budget, maybe except the proliferation of dog food stands across Guyana. Sorry to say, but the Minister of Finance has somehow become the centerpiece of this humorous, exaggerated show of Budget 2019. The Minister prevaricates on positive growth, but cannot come clean and explain to this nation where exactly is the growth he speaks of. Is it in the private sector? No. How many jobs are created? None. Which segments of the business sector? He doesn't know. An honest and expert perusal of the economic indicators, Mr. Speaker, one can conclude that it is borrowed growth through increasing recurrent expenditure in non-productive areas. And Irfan spoke about it, Honorable Member, earlier, about the billions of dollars of expenditure on consumables. So no wonder, Mr. Speaker, our public debt is almost 2 times the size of our current revenue, moving from around 1.1 billion in 2015 to over 1.8 billion by the end of 2018. This works out, Mr. Speaker, to $476,000 per person owing in public debt in our country. So a baby that is born tomorrow morning is born in $476,000 of public debt. And when the Islamic Development Bank 900 million US loan is approved, each person in Guyana will owe a public debt of $728,000. So the government needs to cut its hype and theatrics about this budget. And for all intents and purposes, Budget 2019 will increase the bondage of debt on our citizens. So do not be sweetened with the meager freebies. Jordan economics of growth, increased taxes, increased borrowing, increased spending, and we end up with a Jordan effect, a slowdown economy. The end result, an overtaxed, unproductive, uncompetitive country laden with insurmountable debt. There is no equal, there is no parallel, there is no bibliography to such economic mismanagement and incompetence. This government doesn't know what it is doing. So, Mr. Speaker, I am enthralled that Budget 2019 may very well be the last of the APNU-AFC. Thank you very much.